My daughter died 7 years ago, or so I believed every January when I wired $40,000 to her husband, Brad. That money was earned with aching hands and sleepless nights at my small grocery store, the Harper Family Market. I did it for Ivy. I did it for my wife, Gloria, who died of a broken heart just 6 months after we buried our only child. But on a quiet Tuesday afternoon at Riverside Park, everything changed. Ivy wasn't interested in her usual strawberry swirl ice cream. She leaned in, her small hand gripping my sleeve with a strength that startled me. "Grandpa, please stop sending him money. Please, come to the house and see." I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Pure, unadulterated fear. Before I could ask what she meant, she pulled away, clutching her backpack like a life preserver. "I have to go," she said. "He'll be mad if we're late." That afternoon, the orange and purple Pennsylvania sky looked like a bruise. I didn't know it yet, but I had been paying $280,000 to fund a nightmare. Before we go into the warehouse where the truth was hidden, tell me in the comments, have you ever felt a gut feeling about a family member that turned out to be true? Also, if you believe that justice should be served with absolute finality, hit that subscribe button. I'm Stephen Harper, and this is how I dismantled a 7-year lie. To understand why I believed the lie, you have to understand the night my world ended, March 15th, 2017. 2 officers stood on my porch at 3 a.m. They didn't say, "Your daughter's car." They said, "Your daughter's vehicle," as if a distant word could soften the blow. They told us there was a fire on Route 9. They told us the body was identified through dental records. We were handed a simple brass urn, the size of a shoebox. Gloria, my wife, couldn't even look at it for a week. She wanted to scatter the ashes at Lake Rayburn, where Willa learned to swim, but Gloria's heart gave out before we could. I found her collapsed by the coffee maker Willa had bought us for Christmas. After that, the store was my only anchor. I'd open at 6 a.m., stocking tea for Mrs. Patterson and lottery tickets for old Joe Fletcher. And every January, I sent Brad that $40,000. I told myself he was a grieving single father. I told myself he was just private when he never invited me for dinner or sent school photos. But after Ivy's warning, I started looking for patterns. I realized that every November, like clockwork, Brad would ask for the money early, citing house repairs or school stuff. I checked his social media. 2 years ago, his status changed to "in a relationship." Then it went blank 6 months later. He never told me. He never told Ivy. On a Tuesday morning, a stranger walked into my store. She wasn't a regular. She was in her mid-30s, wearing an expensive leather jacket, moving with a confidence that felt out of place. She bought exactly 2 things, a bag of ground coffee and a small jar of ground cinnamon. When I handed her the change, something tugged at my memory. "Have we met before?" I asked. Her voice was clipped. "I don't think so." 20 minutes later, I saw her outside. She was getting into a silver sedan, and Brad was there. He wasn't the grieving widower I knew. He was leaning against the car, laughing, his hand resting on her waist. That night, I stood in front of the brass urn. For 7 years, I had honored it as sacred, but the coffee and cinnamon purchase kept itching at my brain. My hands shook as I unscrewed the lid. It came off too easily, like it had been opened before. Inside was a plastic bag. I reached in. The ashes were grainy. I smelled it, not the sterile scent of remains, but the rich, unmistakable aroma of dark coffee and sweet, spicy cinnamon. My wife had died crying over a box of kitchen scraps. The rage hit me so hard I swept the urn off the table. It rang hollow on the floor, mocking me. I called my old friend Roger, a retired detective. "The urn is fake," I told him. "They lied to us." Roger didn't tell me to stay calm. He told me to decide what mattered more, Brad's trust or Ivy's safety. We started surveillance. We tracked the mystery woman, Natalie Hughes, Willa's supposed best friend from college. On the fourth day of watching, Brad broke his routine. He drove to the industrial district, pulling into a desolate parking lot for Building 447. It was a brick warehouse with sealed windows and a heavy side door. Roger used his contacts to get security footage from the area. He ran it through facial recognition software, comparing it to Willa's driver's license from 2017. On the screen, two images appeared. One was a smiling 2017 Willa. The other was a grainy shot from the warehouse, older, thinner, but a 97% match. Stephen said, "That's not possible. We buried her." Roger said, "You had a closed casket funeral, Stephen. You cremated someone you never saw, and the urn was filled with coffee grounds. My daughter was alive. While Gloria and I were drowning in grief, while I was writing checks for $40,000, my daughter was being held in a warehouse." We didn't wait for the police that night. We went in. The warehouse was cold, smelling of dust and oil. In the back corner, we found a twin bed, a hot plate, and clothes on wire hangers. And then I saw the wall. It was covered in photos of Ivy. Every school picture, every birthday photo I had ever sent to Brad. Willa was sitting on the bed, her eyes hollow, her hair dull. When the door creaked, she looked up. "Dad?" I wanted to hug her, but I was screaming. "How could you let your mother die thinking you were gone?" Willa collapsed to the floor, sobbing so hard she couldn't speak. The story she told was a masterpiece of manipulation. 7 years ago, Brad and Natalie staged a fight in Willa's apartment. Natalie fell and hit her head. Brad checked her pulse and told Willa, "She's gone." He convinced Willa that even though it was an accident, she would go to prison and lose Ivy forever. He faked her death to protect her. He used a body from a crooked cousin at the morgue, Gary Wells, to stage the car fire. For 7 years he kept her in that warehouse, telling her the police were still looking for her, telling her Ivy was safer not knowing her mother was a killer. Roger said, "Willa, I ran Natalie's name. She's alive. I saw her at a coffee shop 3 days ago." The fight was fake. The death was theater makeup and staging. They didn't do it to protect her. They did it because they had been having an affair for 10 years, and they wanted my money. We met with Detective Walsh of the Fraud Division. We set the trap. Willa was the key. She had to go back into that warehouse and act like she was still under Brad's thumb. She was fitted with a wire, a tiny device near her collarbone. Her safe word was Ivy. At 8:47 p.m., the silver sedan pulled up. Brad and Natalie walked in, laughing. They were planning to fly to the Grand Cayman Islands the next day with the $60,000 they had just transferred to an offshore account. Willa said, "I know everything. I know Natalie is alive." Brad said, "You were supposed to stay hidden. We needed the money. It wasn't personal, Willa. Your father was an easy target." Natalie said, "Your mother passing away? It actually worked out. It made the whole thing more believable." Listening through the earpiece, I felt the air leave my lungs. They were discussing my wife's death like a successful business transaction. When Willa asked to go with them, Brad's voice turned ice cold. Brad said, "You're a liability, Willa. We can't risk you talking. We'll make sure you never tell anyone." That was it. I didn't wait for Walsh. I hit the door with my shoulder. The warehouse exploded with sound. Police swarmed in, weapons drawn. Brad tried to run, but Walsh had him on the concrete in seconds. Natalie stood there with a blank expression, as if being arrested was merely an inconvenience. The trial was a final reckoning. The jury saw the fake urn. They heard the wire recordings of Natalie saying it was just business. The sentences were read in March. Brad Wallace, 15 years in federal prison. Natalie Hughes, 12 years. Gary Wells, the morgue peasant, 5 years. I was granted custody of Ivy, and Willa began the slow, painful process of rebuilding her life. 6 months later, we stood at Gloria's grave. Willa placed fresh white roses at the base, her favorite. Ivy held my hand and looked at the headstone. "Do you think Grandma knows Mom is back?" she asked. I looked at my daughter. She was thinner than she used to be, and she still had nightmares, but she was teaching Ivy how to braid her hair. Stephen said, "I think she knows, Ivy. I really do." My family story didn't end with revenge. It ended with redemption. I spent 7 years paying for a lie, but I learned that while anger is easy, healing is worth the work. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear that truth always finds its way home. And remember, never ignore the red flags. I'm Stephen Harper. Thank you for staying until the end.